Let me introduce myself again. My name is Penny Bongato. I'm a motivational speaker and director of POWERinU Philippines. And I welcome you once again to our webinar entitled Transforming Your Company into a Digital Driven Business. This complimentary webinar is brought to you by POWERinU. POWERinU is a training, coaching, and consulting company with office in the Philippines. Our mission is to partner with organizations to enable them to deliver strong business results by enhancing their talent and leadership through value-adding strategic consulting solutions. I'm very excited and honored today to introduce our speaker. Our speaker, Jeremy Blain, who has visited the country, has visited the Philippines sometime a few years ago, is an award-winning business leader, futurist, new era learning professional, author, and conference speaker. Jeremy is founder and CEO of Performance Works International, PWI, a new era learning services company specialized in helping organizations, leaders, and managers be fit and ready for the future now. Jeremy is a fellow of the Institute of Directors UK, holds a Masters of Management in International Business from the Australian Institute of Business, and a BA Honours from Sheffield University in the UK. Jeremy is also a newly appointed advisory board member of WDHB, one of the world's foremost Industry 4.0 immersive learning experiences companies, leadership expeditions, community events, transformational learning interventions for the disruptive era. Jeremy also has a wealth of international experience, having worked in most major and developing markets in the world to develop business, set up operations, connected to Sagos Group and PWI, and develop channels and distribution alliances. A commercially minded and award-winning L&D entrepreneur, Jeremy has over 20 years experience in the industry as executive board member, managing director, partner, trainer, coach, author, and program creator. In previous roles at Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, and as managing partner of his own point-of-sale software business, Jeremy's roles have included marketing, sales, operations, and general management. Jeremy is a frequent international conference speaker and media commentator on topics related to the global L&D market. Themes include the leadership and management challenges for global organizations as they head to the next workplace shift in the 2020s, the integration of emerging and informal learning technologies, the importance of performance measurement and proving ROI, developing core commercial skills to achieve competitive business advantage, and more. As a result of his research, industry papers, and work in the transformation of work and learning in the digital era, Jeremy has been recognized by Stanford's Who's Who since 2013. In their own words, I quote, Jeremy has consistently demonstrated the dedication, vision, and skills required to be considered among the best. And today, Jeremy will share with us the results of the latest research when they interviewed over 1,800 leaders across North America, Europe, Asia Pacific on their readiness. Jeremy will not only review the main research topics, but focus on how you can transform your business with the exclusive ticking clock, the 11-step model for digital execution. Let us all learn together as we listen to our speaker. Let us all welcome our speaker for tonight, Mr. Jeremy Blain, all the way from the UK. Hi, Jeremy, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Penny. Before I turn my video off and share my screen to give us the bandwidth, let me say, Penny, I think it would be great to hire you as my public relations person. That was a fantastic introduction. Thank you very much. And thanks to the POWERinU team for inviting me today, and to everybody on this webinar who is taking time out of their evening to be here. I appreciate that. And please feel free to share the webinar afterwards once we're done. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to turn my video off to save bandwidth as I go through this. So just give me a few seconds. And you should see my screen appearing any minute now. There we are. And as Penny mentioned, please feel free to ask questions through the chat box as you're going through. The team at POWERinU will keep a track on that, and certainly at the end we will be sharing those questions, and I'll be answering them too. So thank you again for joining this webinar on transforming your organization into a digital-driven business. Now, I must say that before I start this, I will acknowledge that there has been a lot of research in this area. There's a lot of talk about it. It is the jargon of the year for the last probably 3 years, if there was an award for that. It's digital transformation this, digital transformation that. The problem, though, is that we are still talking about it, and many organizations, while trying, have not managed to get over the line with this yet. So we decided to do a little bit of research on that, which I am going to go through. So what I will cover first of all is the motivation behind the research, what has driven that, then the headlines behind it, and you will be able to download the white paper to get more detail after this web session. But importantly, with this research, when we entered into it, we felt that it was important to look at the implementation and execution steps behind digital transformation and provide a model for doing so. When we researched what was out there to help organizations do it, actually there was precious little. So we have created one, and my business partner within this research is Bridges Business Consultancy. And we've come up with a model called the ticking clock model, which mimics, if you like, the doomsday clock, which is, I think, about 3 minutes to midnight. From a digital perspective and digital transformation perspective, we reckon we're about the same. 2019 and 20 representing the last opportunities for large organizations, particularly to grab hold of transformation and make it happen within their organizations. So let's talk about the motivation behind the research. The big motivation behind it, from research done across 2016 and 17 by Forbes and IBM, was this number. And this number represents how many digital strategies fail in their implementation step. This is where it falls down. So many organizations are aware that they need a digital vision, a digital strategy, but the execution steps fail mainly because the task in hand is underestimated or is not seen through, or there are not people committed right through the organization within it. This was an interesting point to us. And for me, I would like to get your opinions also. You are all professionals who are on this webinar. You have seen this maybe in your organization and in others. I'd like you to type in the chat box one word why you feel digital execution often fails. Just type in a word. Let's see what we come up with. So a good one to start with: misalignment, know-how. Oh yes, keep them coming. Keep them coming. We've all been there. Think of this as a kind of a therapy session as well, because this is exactly what's happening out there. Yeah, some great stuff coming out there. Misalignment, communication is a key one there. Senior management involving knowledge. Do we know what we need to know, etc.? And that corresponds to the lack of understanding that of what it really takes. Often, in fact, we don't know what we don't know around this. All that we know is that other people are talking about digital transformation, so we need to do something quickly about it. And therefore, we're sort of forced down a road quicker without the planning that it really takes to do so. So a lot of things that are coming out there, and you continue to add to that list if you like. But you've hit on some key points here. High management support, misalignment, and know-how, really, really key. So from one point, I would say that it starts with attitude. If you're going to enter down this road, everybody has to be on board. And that is often actually where it falls down right at the beginning. But if you do start that road and you are having those communications internally with the leadership team, then there are benefits to be held. And McKinsey in 2018 did a study, and they said, we have studied a number of organizations who have actually implemented digital transformation and integrated digital what they do. Now, when I talk about digital transformation, I don't mean a piece of kit, a technology, a tool. I mean a seamless blending of the human capital with the digital tools that enable the business and provide excellent customer experiences. So that's what it's all about in this hyper-competitive environment that we're all working in. When McKinsey did this study, they found that the first thing that happens is that when they looked at revenue, is that it impacted revenue growth by almost 1 percentage point. So this is in absolute terms. But they went further and they looked at EBITDA as well. And that was even better, almost 2% growth annually, 2 percentage points growth annually compared to their peers, where digital was integrated with the business and the organization was becoming digitally centric. So this is strongly worth doing. There is a fantastic business case. And of course, the flip side is the cost of not doing this is that you're going to fall behind from a competitive point of view and risk failure. And there is no such thing anymore as we know that you're too big to fail. Many organizations are going down that road, and some high profile scalps over the last few years we're all aware of. So when we were looking at all of these results and looking at doing the survey, we were talking by the end of last year and thinking about, okay, if we're going to do some research here, let's study what's been done before and what we can do differently. What we realized was that much of the digital transformation research that had been done was focused in certain areas of the business, either functionally or thinking about how we deal with customers or how we engage employees, and not as an end-to-end process. That's the first thing that we looked at. The second thing that we looked at is that there are so many component parts within this. How can we include them all? And how can we do it simply so it's easy to grasp and therefore becomes easy when we look at the implementation steps? So in order to do that, we looked at where the real issues were, and we looked at it as a road trip. We considered that on this road, there is a journey being had, there are people involved, there are vehicles involved, and at each component part, it's likely that success and failure can have a part to play. So if we consider the road that we're on, have we got a vision? Do we know the route that is going to get us to where we need to be? Can we see the potholes that are in the middle of the road, or are we just blindly looking at the vision that we have and gunning for that, and then being surprised by some of the things that maybe get blocked along the way where we have to take diversions? That's the first piece, and that really is around the link to visioning within the organization. And when I say visioning now, I mean a vision that is suitable for the digital era. The second is the driver. So have we got the right people at the top of the organization who are leading this and moving forward? So they may well have a vision, but is the plan to execute it good enough? Have they got the attitude to see it through? And more importantly, have leaders got the capability to see it through? In fact, many leaders, as we'll come to, are struggling with this area and are immobilized at the moment because they don't know what they don't know. And this is a problem. Then we come into the heart of things, the engine. And the engine that we have is akin for me to the organizational culture. It is lubricated by the oil that makes every part of that engine work together for the good of the vehicle, for the journey, and everybody that we interact with. Organizational culture is at the heart of successful digital transformation, and that cannot be underestimated. I would argue that in the digital era, the human touch and engagement is more important than it ever was, and adapting our culture to that is one of the biggest tasks that we have within organizations today. Because if your culture and organization was geared for success in the 20th century, you're likely to fail in the 21st, because there is so much hitting businesses which are unknowns at the moment, not just in the digital realm. But if we look ahead to the 2020s, the perfect storm, as I like to call it, to come, where you have a new generation joining the workplace, Generation Z, you have an aging population in some countries, you have globalization, you have hyper competition, new competition across industries, more technologies hitting at a pace. We're in what's called the great acceleration at the moment, which is this huge pace of change. And Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, put it really well when he said that the pace of change is faster than it ever has been in history, but will never be as slow again, which is rather sobering, I think, when you consider what we have to do moving forward, and things are just going to get quicker. And the final piece of this jigsaw is the fuel that we're putting into it. So if we've got all of those others in place, we have to fuel the organization. And if there is a new route, capable leadership, and an organizational culture ready for the digital era, we need the new knowledge, skills, behaviors, technology to really kind of suit what the organization is gunning for and to fuel it as it moves forward. Doing what we used to do is not good enough. This, ladies and gentlemen, was at the heart of our research, how we started the process, but also how we came up with an implementation model. So very, very quickly, and I don't intend to go into detail on this slide other than to say this is a very robust survey. The respondents represented within this that isn't on this chart is around 60% senior leadership, and the rest management and individual contributors across 3 continents, and high proportion from the East as much as the traditional West, which in this case is North America and Europe. This was the set that we looked at. Across Asia Pacific, you can see that the Philippines was involved in this. And if we take a snapshot of like how are we doing out there at the moment, then my big headline from the research is Asia Rising. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that digital is leveling the competitive playing field out there, which I'll come to again shortly. It means that many countries are able to start at the same point, whether they're an emerging economy or a mature economy. Digital is enabling a leapfrogging of that journey, so everybody's starting at the same rate. Now, those that are starting with a fresh piece of paper, one could argue, have somewhat of an advantage, because they are not burdened with 20th century systems, processes, ways of doing business, all of those kind of things. So therefore, in this way, for me, in one way, I wasn't surprised with this, but in another, it is a big shout out to the traditional West that the power is shifting. And the Financial Times just in April actually did an article, and I believe that the headline was that the Asia century is about to begin. There you go, or is set to begin. There it is. The sobering thoughts for within the survey were really directed to Europe, which was falling behind. Many countries in Europe falling behind, and there are lots of reasons for that, which I shall go into. So let me give you a summary of the 4 key points that came out of this survey. The first is that almost half of all leaders interviewed are not prepared for digital transformation. So we have an issue at the top of our organizations. They are not ready. They are not capable to do so. So what do we need to do? The rest of the organization who is capable need to be coming up the line with ideas and with pressure and challenge that things need to change. This is about competitive health moving forward and preparing for the 2020s right now, if not too late. So leadership, there is a problem. Partly that is not knowing what we don't know, partly an immobilization, and I'll come to that in a minute. The second point is the point that I made before, is that the playing field is being leveled, and therefore countries, regions have the opportunity to leapfrog not just the traditional journey of doing things, but also the competitive spaces within which they play it. And it's no accident that if you look in your country now, across Southeast Asia as well, then the competition is not necessarily the industry companies and new starters there. It's actually countries that are coming in which are playing in that field. And I would single out China as being one of the most effective in terms of internationalizing and changing their whole culture from a corporate perspective to compete in this digital era. And they're doing well. And I think there's a lesson for us there, across the world, in fact. The third is that in the traditional West, particularly, bureaucracy and red tape is getting in the way. So I know this. I know this dramatically right now. I'm in the UK, where you may have heard of something called Brexit. Of course you have. You can't get away from it at the moment. And that is really taking over every single conversation, not just here, but in the rest of Europe. And because of that, and because of the processes and systems that are in place, across organizations in Europe, there is a lack of confidence. People are waiting to see what happens, but nothing is happening in terms of transforming the organizations or even countries from a bureaucratic point of view. So you're not only coping with corporate culture bureaucracy, but also governmental bureaucracy and rules, regulations that are being put in place that you have to suddenly get on board with from an urgent point of view to do something about. So GDPR around data protection being one. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying that's one example of new processes and systems which are being driven more in a piecemeal way to many Western organizations, particularly in Europe. The fourth area is that, then very surprising one for us in this survey, is that alarm bells do not seem to be ringing loud enough across boardrooms right across the world. So I'm now going to go into each of those areas. If I go back to our road trip, and I'm going to talk about the road and the driver. So the vision that we have moving forward, and who's in charge at the wheel, and should we be scared or should we be really pleased? So the key findings that we had, and this is overall, over 40% of companies that we interviewed for this research have a digital vision. 60% do not. So what that means for me is that we still have our traditional 20th century ways of doing business. We're not shifting perspective or mindset within the organization to challenge what we've done from the past and think about what the future needs from a competitive point of view and organizational culture point of view, which is really critical, and then have a vision that is right for the digital era. Because if the vision is right for the digital era, that means that we can move forward in a way that everybody can buy into. It's engaging, it's understandable, and it changes how we do things around here in organizations. The more surprising and worrying piece is that 40% of the leaders that we interview are not committed to adopting a digital vision. This is cause for concern because this indicates apathy at leadership level. And this was more in Asia Pacific from our journey in some areas, but mainly in some of the bureaucratic countries in Europe, not so much in North America. But a cause for concern, because if the leadership is not committed to this, if they don't drive a digital vision, there is no hope that the organization is going to change. And there is no hope that the people will stay with the organization. This impacts everything. This impacts those people in the organization who are committed. And I will come to that in a minute. The third point is that, to compound the issue of not having a vision for the future or commitment at the top, is that the organization themselves, almost half of the organizations aren't even ready. So even if we did have that digital vision, there is a big task to have. And many organizations and leaders are underestimating the task at hand of what it actually means for digital transformation. And this explains why so many are failing, because they're not considering root and branch what this actually means. And that is why we came up with a model to demonstrate just the amount of steps that you need to do and what's involved in it. So that's the road and the driver. Let's talk about the vehicle and the engine right now. So remember, this is at the heart of the organization and what we're doing. So across the organizations, there is an acknowledgement that we need greater transformational speed. We need to accelerate what we're doing. So there is a willingness to do something there, but that willingness is in the middle of the organization, not always at the top, as we've seen. So there is a disconnect in part between some leaders and some of the rest of the organization. Transformation is a significant challenge for 60% of the organizations that we interviewed here. So again, not just acknowledging the task, but acknowledging, yes, we now realize that it is a challenge. So this is where we have seen the pivot from 2018 to 19 of organizations suddenly realizing what needs to happen and suddenly seeing what digital transformation needs and standing almost on the precipice without knowing what to do next. I can't take a step off here because it's just not safe. I don't know what to do. It's a significant challenge for me and my organization. But the rest of the organization is ready. In fact, 60% of your organizations are ready. Our people are there for the journey. They understand this. They understand that transformation needs to happen. And many of the reasons why people are leaving organizations at the moment is that there is no vision for the future. We're not being managed for growth for the future, and I'm not getting the development for the future skills that I need. So it's really kind of interesting that people are voting with their feet here. So digital transformation is a massive piece for HR to grab hold of in terms of attracting talent, developing talent, and retaining talent. Those that do it well are the ones that are winning that new war for talent, if you like, at the moment. Finally, our three-part fuel mix, as I call it, so the fuel to get all of this going, is around, first of all, our digital structure and thinking digitally. This is how I would summarize this. And there are huge challenges within this. Systems are antiquated. Systems are often different across different functions in the organization. I'm working with one large multinational at the moment, and I'm privileged enough to be working across about 4 or 5 different functions. And the shocking thing, and this isn't even what I'm working on actually, but having done this research, I'm hyper aware of it. They've got 5 different systems in place. And it's not just that they've got 5 different systems in place, they don't talk to each other. So they are not geared for the new way of doing things in the digital realm, if you like, by having integrated systems that talk to each other and are capable of talking and linking with the customers as well, because that's where customer value and experience will come from a digital perspective, is when we can shortcut the processes and systems that we have used in the past and really start looking ahead at future growth together. The second thing is around cyber risk. And while there is an acknowledgement that cyber risk is key in digital strategy, and it's one of the main areas where people who are going down this road are focused, it's not enough. The majority of people are challenged in this area. I think by 2021, at the rate it's going at the moment, cyber crime will cost the world $6 trillion by 2021. If that isn't sobering enough, cyber risk, we've just heard on the news, I think it just broke yesterday, WhatsApp was hacked, and many of your organizations, like my own previous organization as well, we used WhatsApp within our organization and with customers to communicate, but it was just hacked yesterday. What does that do to your data? How does that protect your customers' trust if that's happening and you're using these tools which are freely available out there but are not geared for business success? And the third part is how we work around digital structuring. And at the heart of successful digital businesses is the methodology of design thinking. This is interestingly enough, when we were doing the research, the secret ingredients in terms of how we do things around here that really drives collaboration and a flattening of the hierarchy to enable the rest of the organization to get on board, to drive their ideas through. In fact, this is helping with that failing fast, failing forward approach that you may have heard of, which is giving people a structure within which they can test and experiment and start to look at new solutions moving forward, not just from leadership level, but right through the organization. 55% of the organizations are not understanding and leveraging big data. This is a key competitive advantage component for the next 5 years. Data should drive everything within the organization. Data should inform strategy, and that strategy should inform how we do things within the organization, how quickly we need to do them, and what we need to have in place in order to execute them fully. Big data is going to explode in terms of its value over the next year or so when 5G infrastructure comes in. So 5G, when we went back to some of the leaders in this survey and we said, what do you think 5G will do for your business? The answers we got were slightly worrying, because it was all about, well, I'll get greater bandwidth, we can share more, we can maybe share more videos and do more on video. This is the tip of the iceberg for 5G. 5G enables organizations to have real-time data, real-time decision-making, and real-time partnering with their customers through leveraging big data. And it's not just about having big data, it's about using that data across the organization so that it is visualized well. Because if you think about the data that we have today, in 2 days, the data that we have over 2 days today is equivalent to all of the data that we had in the whole of 2003. That gives you a sense of scale. We can't now just do this on Excel. We can't just share Excel spreadsheets and hope people do it. We have to visualize this data. And in order to do that, we need to train and have it in the mentality of the organization in terms of how we work in the digital era. And that is about a 21st century organizational model. And almost half organizations are not there yet. And therefore, it's not just a shift in mentality and digital visioning, if you like. It's about how we gear the organizational culture and model of how we work to make it tick and to make it successful. So that was the results in headline terms of our survey. And from that perspective, that wasn't enough for us. We said, well, okay, we now know where the real problems are when we consider digital transformation from an end-to-end perspective, but there is precious little out there about how to do this. So for further detail on the actual data itself and the research, you can download the white paper. I'll give you the link shortly. But what I'm going to show you now is actually what we did around modeling for this, to give you an idea of what you can do and the journey to go through to implement successful digital transformation. And the key question is your organization set for speed, or are you continually hitting a brick wall? Well, let's find out. The first thing that I would say is, although I've been talking about it all web session so far, is to stop talking about digital transformation. This is not digital transformation. This is whole business model transformation. This is where one of the big problems lays, is that many organizations are looking at digital execution, and they're looking at, because it's digital, what's the tool, what's the technology that I need, what's the digital process that I need, and they're going down the road without considering the needs of the overall business. This is a shift in business model. This is a shift in the culture that the organization has to adopt to be ready for the digital era, to compete and succeed. Otherwise, it's risking failure. And this is where we came up with our 11-step ticking clock model, the digital doomsday model, if you like. So I'm going to explain what this is just in step by step, just for now. And if you need more detail, because we don't, of course, within a webinar, have so much time to go into the deeper detail within each component part, then of course you will have my contact details. You can talk to me. You can read the paper a little bit more too. The first thing about the ticking clock model, it has three key components. The first is around future thinking, which is what do we have to do now to be envisioned for the future. The second is around centricity and how we're organizing around our customers at the heart of everything, our culture, how it is adapting, and how our operations are becoming more efficient to fuel what we need to do with our customers. And a third component around future proofing. How do we keep measuring where we're going and have the right digital measures in place so that we're constantly adapting and moving forward, because the pace of change is going to be quicker than ever. Around that are 11 key steps, which is quite daunting, no doubt. 11-step model, wow, that's a lot. Yes, it is a lot. And this is why many organizations have failed, because they have not considered the full journey. They haven't considered just how involved the journey can be and broken it down. So when we broke it down this way, we realized that the whole job actually becomes much easier if you treat it in its component parts. So let me just explain very briefly each component part. We talked about this. Have you a vision for the digital era? I'll use a banking example for this. So a bank that I work with in the Arab Emirates, their digital vision is to automate our banking systems. That is their digital vision. Okay. The vision of the best bank in the world, which the digital vision of the best bank in the world, which is DBS, is to make banking invisible and joyful. That is their digital vision. That vision in one sentence encapsulates exactly what they need to do and drives the huge transformation which has been driven by the CEO Piyush Gupta here and has shifted the culture into one that is right for the digital era. It is becoming the way they do things around there. They talk about it. They gear for success around their customers around it, and they bring their employees along with them, along with the leadership. And the brave thing that they did is to flatten the hierarchy of the bank so that everybody had a part of this journey. Establish your digital vision. And that leadership mindset in digital is epitomized by Piyush Gupta at the CEO of DBS, who recognized and held his hand up and said, you know what, I don't know all of this. I need to learn it, but I'm holding my hand up and saying, you know what, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm going to learn it. And he took part in a lot of the activities that they did. Then once he'd been through it, he set up hackathons for all of his senior leadership and management team so that they could engage and embed themselves in a digital way of thinking before launching a digital vision and strategy to get people on board. Very, very enlightened view. And that is all about thinking about the future. As we move round to the centricity piece, this is around a digital first culture. So this is about not thinking in 20th century terms. This is thinking about 21st century and how our culture needs to adapt to all of these changes that are hitting our business, the hyper competition and competitive states that we're operating in, the challenges our people face, the new competition we don't even know yet, the changing face of the socio-economic environment in the world and in our country, etc., etc. We need a culture that suits that, but that suits that tomorrow and that guarantees success tomorrow and doesn't look backwards for what was successful for us yesterday, because it may not be appropriate. The next thing is about learning to experiment and co-create, and this is around creating an environment for acceptable failure or controlled failure. Fail early, fail fast, fail forward. This is the spirit behind this. This is engaging everybody in that journey and making sure that everybody can be a part of that and feel that they're contributing to it. A big part of that is number 5, which is adopting the right processes and ways of working which allow that. And this is why design thinking is at the heart of every successful digitally enabled business out there at the moment. So those that have successfully transformed, and I will say from a McKinsey research, by the way, only 15% of companies in the world today have fully integrated and have fully gone through the journey of digital transformation. But this is how they work. It's an agile way of working. It brings people along with it, and it flattens the organization so that ideas and innovations and the work behind it can be driven by anyone, not just by the leadership. The second thing is that while we're doing that internally, is think about customer journeys. Is, you know, if we're focused on that, is we ask the question, what is the customer relationship with us now, and what is their journey with us in the future? Can we tell that story? Can we build the story for the customer whereby they can come with it, they can come along with the journey, we can work closer together because you can bet that they're going through the transformation as well, and that we look at the route that we're on together. So a much more strategic way. And then operationally, we look at every single touch point that the customer has with our organization, and we look to align the approach, one organizational approach, not one function dealing with one part of the business, one function dealing with another. We have an aligned strategic approach so that there is a seamless way of working with the customer and the customer's way of working with us. In order to do that, you need to build ecosystems that work. So this is removing legacy systems, and this is going to a platform approach. You know, and moving it's changing the way that we think about systems and technologies, and thinking about ecosystems. What does it look like for our organization to make sure that our technologies, first of all, talk to each other, embody what we're trying to achieve internally, link to the customer systems in a way that makes doing business easy for both parties, and also creates environments where our teams can work either internally, externally, or together. So this is now a thinking ecosystem, and you know, in order to do that at the moment, we're having to use different tools. So we have I explained the business that I'm working with before, and they're having to buy new technologies to fit in with their old technologies, so they can not only talk to other technologies in the business, but actually give the data that they need. It's a hugely laborious process, rather than actually reinventing what is needed and developing from there. But it's also why this is an involved and somewhat expensive business. The budget has to be right. We need to empower employees, and employees not only need to be given the opportunity to experiment and drive these projects through, but they need to be empowered to drive the customer journey, and to come round the line and up the line and challenge the organization. Empowered employees are collaborative, they're motivated, they're engaged, and they also do number 9, which is protect your customers' trust. They are absolutely focused on the customer. The other component about protecting your customer trust is, do you have the right cybersecurity data protection elements in place, whereby a customer or customers, whether it's B2B or B2C, can trust dealing with you as an organization, that they're safe in doing so by electronic means, that they can communicate with you, and that they know what they're getting from you. That's the centricity piece. So that is around customer, around culture, and around operations. And then finally, around future proofing, this is making sure we're becoming data driven, and making sure that when we have all of this data, that we visualize the data in a very efficient manner, which enables us to make rapid decision making, agile operations moving from that as well. Once we've made the decision, everybody on board, and rapid change. This is about strategy as much as anything else, but this now means that strategy can move from 3 years to 2 years to a 1-year strategy, and can be driven, and tactics can be driven more fluidly based on real-time data that comes through. And finally, is that, and behind that, that point in itself, is making sure that everything that we do in terms of the digital vision and strategy of our business is measurable, is giving us the data to inform whether we're going in the right direction, whether we need to make some changes, what's happening from the competitive space, and how it informs how we grow into the future. So I That's probably the quickest I've had to present that, but I hope it's given you a flavor of the three key components in the middle: future thinking, centricity, and future proofing, and what is involved around the outside. Now, here is key though. Here is what, when I shade these areas in gray in a minute, here is what organizations are good at now. Just these three key areas: the digital visioning, empowered employees, and measuring that digital vision and digital strategy to a certain extent. Now, look at that. That is cause for alarm. This explains many of the research outputs which are coming out to us that I've taken you through. It also should drive a sense of urgency across the businesses. So what we do is we take this to leadership teams everywhere. We present this, we do the diagnostic with them, and we really challenge the leadership team, because that is what is needed in some traditional organizations, and really force them to acknowledge that a change is needed, because it starts with attitude. I talked about this before. It starts with attitude. If any leader or in any boardroom sees this and is not fazed by it, or is not worried by it, then they shouldn't be in that position. This is where we are good at right now, and it is a poor state of affairs. We need to get much better. So how do you execute that? Is that we've talked about these 11 steps. Is you do it in two ways. First of all is considering speed. Not all industries require urgency and speed now, and you can be forgiven for thinking that, because digital transformation is deemed as urgent and important, and it is for many industries. So that high urgent and high speed are industries like banking, telecommunications, technology, healthcare, a number of things like that. But at the other end of the scale, parts of the agricultural sector, parts of the mining sector are not reliant on high speed. Another sector in retail, luxury, for example, is not reliant on digital as yet, because it's that personal touch and the human touch which is driving what luxury is all about. How it evolves is there to be seen, but they have more time than certain other sectors. The other thing is to consider is how we actually execute these 11 steps, and what we do for that is we overlay, I'm afraid to say, another 8. So this is not 11 steps, ladies and gentlemen. This is 19 steps, more or less, because we have to consider what is the people plan, what's the business case which enables us to say, here's the benefits we'll derive from it, here's the cost of doing nothing, what's the communication and engagement plan that we have, how are we going to measure progress as we go, because this, remember, the implementation phase is where it fails. What does the organization culture need to look like? How do we start to shift that right now? Because that does not happen overnight. But how do we start to create and fuel the culture which is appropriate and bought into for the digital era? What are the new processes, systems, and tools that we need, which gives us the right ecosystem for doing business internally, externally, and together? How do we review ongoing to make sure that we're still fit, not only for today and fit for tomorrow? And this is why this is cyclical, and it's also why it goes up to 11, because 12 is where failure happens. If you're getting to the top of the clock, or you've not even left the top of the clock for some organizations, then that's the fine line between success and failure. So this is our 11-step ticking clock model, added with the execution pieces needed to be in place. And I don't apologize for this, because this is a difficult task, and it is about time we started having realistic conversations within business to suggest why this is difficult and what we need to do and to plan now. When I talked about DBS before, these are the key things that made transformation happen, according to Piyush Gupta, the CEO, just as a kind of a tick box exercise, who went through this whole process. It was a culture change first and foremost from the top down. They took risks, they experimented, they had to be agile, but they also had to acknowledge that it was a long role. This was a 2-year period for the bank. And you can see the other points here as well, but they are obsessively data driven. They're obsessively focused on the customer and making banking invisible. As I talked about before, they don't want customers to worry about it. They want it at their fingertips, and continuous change is what's going to keep them ahead of the curve. So in order to move forward, before I open this to Q&A, is to say there's a few things that can help out there. First of all, our white paper, and you can download that from that link there, which is also on the next page, which I shall put on for you when I move on. My partner in this research is a guy called Robin Speculand, who's a strategy implementation expert who's written a book around this, and who is currently writing the book on DBS, around how they became the best digital bank in the world. So between us, we have a huge amount of experience in this area of working with organizations at strategic and operational level in, first of all, getting leadership to acknowledge that it's happening, B, to plan what needs to happen, define the strategy, and implement the strategy. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much indeed for your time. I do appreciate that that was a rather rapid review of some of the research and the modelling, but I am hopeful that that's given you a real flavour of what it takes from an end-to-end process, where organizations are falling down, and the structure and process for actually going through this in a way. So as a reminder, that's where you can download the white paper, and please do feel free to connect with me at any time. I'm now going to end sharing my screen and hand back to the POWERinU team for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation that leaves us with a lot of questions, in fact. And I'm sure the people in the attendees of this webinar have questions to ask of you. Very interesting presentation. I don't know where to begin. So I don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
So we are now opening the floor to questions. So feel free to type in your questions at the chat box or raise your hand if you wish to ask your questions through your mic.
Yes,
okay.
There's certainly some questions come up there, Penny, on the chat box, but I'll let you lead that.
Yep. Okay. So there is a question here from Amberina G. At times to start the tipping clock is easy. How to set the right matrix to ensure the measurement is practical and achievable? Should not the matrix set at step 6 or step 7?
Well, part of the, if I'm reading this correctly, and Amberina, forgive me if I'm misinterpreting what you're asking here, but digital measurement starts at digital visioning. So once we have the vision in place, while we're talking about measuring that from a future proofing point of view, we're also talking about that of measuring it from day one. So starting with the end in mind. And I talked about, as we're moving through that model, having the milestones in place that help us to know that we're going in the right direction. So measurement comes in actually the 3 phases: the future thinking elements, centricity, and are we going in the right direction with our customers? Are our people on board, and are our operational systems able to cope with the direction that we're heading? And future proofing, are the changes that we're making having an impact on ourselves and on our customers, and what do we need to do next? What are other people doing? So I think it's a good point, because it's not explicit, but as we go into the detail at every stage of these, as you can imagine, while I've gone through those 11 steps in rather rapid pace, at step 1 and 2, there's a lot of time there that we would spend with the leadership team in articulating the vision, what it actually means, and how they're going to measure each step of the journey by breaking it down to its component parts. So I do think it's a really good point that you raise, and I would say that it's not even about step 6 and 7, it's right through.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the attendees? Okay, coming from Kat. Is there there is some challenging data here, but what are the 2 to 3 things that the best companies do to drive successful transformation in their business?
Yes, yeah, and this is easy to say, but not necessarily easy to do. So thanks for the question, Kat. The first thing is that the best companies have leaders who understand it, acknowledge what they need to do and what they need to be, and drive it with the rest of the organization. That's the first point. So it starts with leadership attitude. That attitude then filters through the rest of the organization and infects positively the organization. And often this is where actually it can fall down. So the best digitally driven businesses, and when I say digitally driven businesses, I don't mean a technology company. I mean a company that is ready for the digital era, have leadership who really get it and who live the way we do things around here or need to do things around here. That's the first thing. The second thing is having a organizational culture that is fit for the digital era. So out of everything that I've said, this was the heart of the matter, is that as important as digital and technology is, the most important component of digital transformation and whole business model transformation is the human heart and the human touch. So driving that culture and helping everybody orientate their mentality to a new way of working, particularly if they're working for more traditional organizations that haven't changed in a while. If they're still mired with a 20th century model, this is a huge shift to be thinking in 21st century terms. But it's, of course, it's what startups are doing, what digital companies are doing, and what they used to do. So that culture shift is fundamental to success. And the third thing that they're doing, and there are more, but the third thing most definitely they're doing is the leverage of big data. So it's not only about the leadership and the rest of the organization along with the road, it's about the measurement and the use of data. The use of data to make decisions and the use of data to measure that we're going in the right direction, that we're doing the right things, and the ability to shift and move course if we need to. I hope that answers your question, Kat.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. I know we're running out of time, but let's give some time. I hope the attendees will have time for a few more questions. Um, I do have a question before we put another question here. My question to you, Jeremy, is like what I said earlier. Where do we start? Where and how do we start the journey? There's so much to do.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's the question that DBS asked, and by creating a digital vision that captured the essence and the spirit of the journey that they wanted to take was the biggest single factor in driving a mentality change. So I would say it's establish a digital vision which really means something, because visions and missions, how we used to do it, is just a bunch of words in some organizations. You see it upon when you come in reception. It often doesn't mean anything to customers, never mind your employees. But in DBS, the digital vision of making banking invisible and joyful is something that they live and breathe on a day-to-day basis. It is hugely important to them now, and it was hugely important when they embarked on the journey to get that right. So that didn't just come overnight. That was discussed in dark rooms, in meetings, and you name it, over a period of weeks. It was gone into, the component parts were discussed. It was broken down of what that actually meant in spirit as well as the practical nature. And then it started to help them look at each component part of the business and think about, well, yes, so actually this is driving a whole shift of not just what we need to do, but how we go about doing things. So while on the outside they looked at that, right at the heart of it, they realized they needed the culture change as well. But it was all driven by having that vision fit for the digital era, that future thinking piece.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. We are into the last 2 questions, and I believe that Amberina has a question. How do you convince or sell to the C-level? That's the most difficult part, I think, about this project.
Exactly. You hire me to do it for you. That's what you do. I go into boardrooms and I'm often faced with people sitting like this, looking rather sternly at me like this and saying, I've been in this business for 35, 40 years. You can't tell me, da, 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 da. And my aim is to frighten them a little bit, and to show them what their competitors are doing a little bit, and to show them the benefits if they do something differently, but more importantly, the cost of doing nothing. And the cost of doing nothing is often business failure. Failure as a leader, failure as a business, and failure in your duty of care to your customers and to your employees. So it's using these big arguments like that. It is no good now having organizations which are struggling with this. Often, actually, in some parts of the world, are those which still have very hierarchical structures and traditional ways of doing things, and nobody has the courage to step through the door and say, you need to listen, you need to do something different, and here's why. So I think having these big ticket arguments, and helping them understand what is needed and where their gaps are is absolutely key. The way I found that that's worked for me when I've actually stepped into the lion's den like this now, and I have done many times, is that beforehand I've done a lot of preparation with other senior leaders and ex-com leaders within the room to understand who is on board with the journey and who isn't. And I've leveraged my allies around that, and I've started to support them in their internal discussions, and they've supported me in terms of, you know, the route to go. So before you do anything, before you barge into the door, I would go and talk to, you know, your allies at C-level, right across the organization, even if you don't work with them every day, and just gather a temperature check of what's it like in the boardroom when you're talking about this at the moment. What do they need to see to really be convinced of change, and start to own it? You know, the more people walk through that door and own it from the rest of the organization, the more pressure builds for leadership to hold their hand up and say, you know what, you're right, we don't know what we don't know, and we need to do something about it, so help us. And that's how the organization starts to flatten. It's not the answer, but it is one thing that you can do, because it's tough out there, I know.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. And hire you is the answer, right? Okay, I know we've extended a bit. I
Yeah.
do hope that the attendees will stay on because there's a bit more question. Please don't leave us because this is a really an interesting subject. Another question from June Marfori, and as you can see, as you can read, I know this might be a very an simplistic question, but as I understand, digital transformation requires substantial investment. So, what is the typical manner in which ROI for this type of investment is measured?
Well, actually, many organisations who are embarking this, who have come on a rather traditional journey, are still doing it in the way that they've always done it, which is they've looked at the capital expenditure, they've looked at how it can be amortized over time. So, from an accounting perspective, they give themselves, let's say, a transformational period of 3 years, and a step-by-step integration of technologies and cost in P&L terms. But what they've got to have in mind is that, you know, while you can manage the P&L, you've got to manage the cash flow at the same time. So when doing a lot of this, so, you know, SAP is a good example of some organizations that have done big technological implementations in recent times. What they've had to do first is spend a lot of time in the 1 year, 2 years previously, thinking about how they're developing the cash flow to drive that as they're spending money on each step of the digital transformation, not only how they're kind of amortizing over time. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be realistic about it and not to try and do everything at once. So this is why we talking about ecosystem. This is not just looking at a marketing system, a finance system, and what have you, because you've got leaders around the table, around the XCOM table, who's saying, I want a system for my department. The finance person saying, no, we need a new one. HR is saying, we need a brand new HRMS, because don't you know it's HR 4.0 right now. We need this, and this is what it's going to do. If you're looking at investment like that, it's going to be too costly. So looking at an ecosystem that says, what is the new breed of technologies and artificial intelligences that can help us create a woven system that meets the needs of the functions while actually wraps up to what the business needs overall and ultimately what our customers needs. So while this is still an expensive undertaking, it can be managed in a much better way than piecemeal system by system. So it's thinking about it in line with your digital vision as an ecosystem rather than component parts. So when you wrap that together with a firm financial plan, which then means that you're looking at this in costing terms over time, over perhaps a period of 2 or 3 years, it starts to be easier to manage. But I don't want organizations, particularly large ones, to underestimate that it is a cost. And this is not the only cost. You've not just got these systems and digital pieces, you've got how you're shaping the rest of the organization and how that needs to come in line with new ways of doing business. And that takes investment. So start looking at investment, not cost.
Okay, investment, not cost. This is for the long term, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a rather, I wouldn't call it stupid question, but I'll ask it as well. You mentioned DBS, you mentioned the bank.
Yes.
And as you know the Philippines and the Philippine market as well in terms of the banking industry. And many of our banks have legacy systems. So
yeah.
would is it now time to retire the legacy system?
Well, you're going through a transformational period, so you can't just switch like this, because you need to, as I was talking about before, you need to protect your customers' trust. You need to protect the customer environment. You need to retain customers that you have and grow new customers at the same time. So this takes careful planning. So from a transformational point of view, whether it's technology or actually if we're talking about culture, you're not trying to do everything at once. So it's starting to look at how you're evolving the ecosystem. It's starting to look at which systems are becoming redundant or which are causing the most amount of rework within your organization. This is certainly another organization that I'm working with. They're dealing with antiquated systems, and what they're doing is they're keeping the antiquated systems, building new systems and apps and tools which feed into them, but actually don't do the job that they should do. So they're compounding the problem. So instead of trying to fix legacy issues, it's starting to think, what are the key pieces of technology or tools that we need which are going to help us make it more efficient internally and with our customers? Integrate and test that at the same time that your legacy systems are still there. So there is an overlap. There's an overlap period of where you have to go through a test phase in this to make sure it all works, of course. And then you can gradually phase out the old legacy systems. But again, I think, Penny, I think for that one particularly, that's a very specific question for each and every business, because it is different in every business. Some have many legacy systems that they're trying to transform and change. Some have maybe one. Some are starting from scratch again, and are actually quite happy doing so. So kind of depends on where you are to start that journey.
Okay, so it seems that journey is really an interesting journey that for some would require a lot of change in mindset and a lot of change in thinking and new ways of doing things, as you mentioned.
Yeah, which is why the final thing I'll say, which is why my whole point about the research and the modeling afterwards is to demonstrate that this is not just an overnight job. This requires a huge amount of thought and planning and implementation steps, because it's implementation where it fails. Not at defining strategy that we need to remove legacy systems and change our culture, but how we actually do it. That's the reason why we came up with the 11-step model. And it's also the reason why we overlaid the how behind that as well in terms of execution, which almost makes it 19 or 20 steps. So we're not saying that this is a straightforward journey for some organizations, but for those that are finding it difficult, this at least gives them a structure to do it step by step and take their time in doing it correctly, rather than making mistakes down the line.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So on behalf of POWERinU, Jeremy, we would like to extend our gratitude to you for sharing with us your time. I know it's lunchtime in the UK, and sharing your time with us with the results of your research and how we as leaders can map out our journey towards digitalization to ensure its success and sustainability. So what do you think? my dear participants, to this webinar. Did you enjoy the webinar today? Did you learn something from it? Well, I do hope that you enjoyed and learned as much as I did. We here in the Philippines have experienced some changes with our companies as well. Some of the banks are now moving into, digitalizing their customer experience as well. We do have our next webinar. So I so don't miss. We have our next webinar, which will be on June 19, 2019. And the topic is building your coaching leader manager skills in a digital world. And our speaker would be Elaine Cercado of POWERinU. So please don't miss out on this. I encourage you to subscribe to at www.powerinU.com.ph to get the latest updates on events, webinars, and free resources from POWERinU and its partners. Our next free webinar, as I mentioned, will be on June 19, and our topic, as you saw, was building your coaching leader manager skills in a digital world to be conducted by our POWERinU director, Elaine Cercado. So from knowing what to do to execute digitalization, we will now focus on preparing people, not just the organization, not just digitalization, but for leadership and management in general. Everyone in this webinar will automatically get an email invite to this. So we hope you can join us on June 19 as well. The materials for the upcoming webinar are part of the two coaching solutions of POWERinU, the coaching clinic and the leadership series called Empowering Your Leadership in a Digital Future Through Coaching. So you may visit the POWERinU website to know more about these solutions, or you may email info@powerinU.com.ph to inquire and learn more about them. Before we end, let me remind everyone that you will be given access to a recording of this webinar. This will be shared through your email within 24 to 48 hours after our webinar session ends. So once again, I'd like to thank Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you very much for taking time off for our webinar. And thank you everyone for joining us, and see you next webinar on June 19. So everyone have a good afternoon, Jeremy, and good evening to the people in the Philippines.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks, Penny. Bye-bye.
Salamat po. Bye.